In a quiet Pennsylvania farmhouse kitchen, a woman in a plain dress lifts the wooden lid of a stoneware crock, and the smell of fermenting cabbage rises into the air. The technique she is using to preserve her family's winter food is, by modern regulatory standards, either illegal to sell, considered dangerous by food safety authorities, or quietly forgotten by the country that surrounds her. Yet, at this exact moment, in laboratories at Stanford, MIT, and food science institutes across Europe, engineers and researchers are publishing peer-reviewed papers describing the very same method she learned from her grandmother, only they are giving it a new name. This is the story of 19 specific food techniques the Amish never stopped using, while industrial America forgot them entirely, and why modern science is now quietly admitting that those plain-dressed grandmothers were right all along. Consider first the root cellar. 4 feet beneath the surface, the soil holds a steady temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 months a year, regardless of the weather above. Modern engineers call this passive thermal mass storage, the foundational principle behind earth-sheltered architecture and the geothermal heat pumps now selling for $30,000 per installation. The Amish call it a root cellar, and inside one, potatoes, apples, carrots, and cabbage outlast their refrigerated equivalents by 6 months or more, with absolutely zero electricity consumed. Studies funded by the USDA have quietly confirmed what every Amish family already knew. The refrigeration industry, which framed root cellars as primitive and unsanitary in the post-war marketing era, profits handsomely from the fact that most American homes no longer have one. In the same cool basement sits the crock of sauerkraut. Cabbage shredded with exactly 2% salt by weight creates an anaerobic brine in which Lactobacillus plantarum and Leuconostoc mesenteroides outcompete every pathogen that tries to enter. A 2021 Stanford study on fermented foods measured significant increases in gut microbiome diversity and a measurable drop in inflammatory markers among test subjects who consumed fermented vegetables daily. Amish families have done this in stoneware crocks for 200 years, with no scientist watching, no peer review, and no marketing budget. Beside the crock sits a 5-gallon bucket of eggs submerged in a milky solution. This is water glassing, the practice of preserving unwashed fresh eggs in sodium silicate. The silicate forms a microscopic gel that seals the eggshell pores, blocking oxygen and bacteria for 12 to 18 months without refrigeration. USDA-graded commercial eggs cannot legally be sold using this method, yet homesteaders only rediscovered this technique in the last decade, after a century of forgetting it existed. On the stove sits a heavy pot brought to a rolling boil, then lifted and placed inside a wooden box stuffed with straw. The lid closes. The pot will finish cooking entirely from its own retained heat, consuming no additional fuel. This is the haybox fireless cooker, a wartime fuel rationing technology that cuts cooking energy by 80%. It has been rebranded by modern companies as the thermal retention cooker and sold under names like the Wonder Bag for $80 or more. Amish kitchens used these continuously through the decades America forgot they existed. In the smokehouse out back, slabs of pork back fat are slowly melting at low temperature into pure white lard. Pasture-raised lard, contrary to half a century of public health messaging, is high in monounsaturated fats, has a smoke point of 370 degrees Fahrenheit, and contains naturally occurring vitamin D. The BBC ranked pork fat number 8 on its 2018 list of the world's most nutritious foods. The USDA-era campaign that villainized lard in favor of industrial seed oils was driven not by science, but by the rise of cottonseed and soybean processing industries that needed a market for their waste byproducts. In the dairy room, fresh cream sits in a wooden churn, slowly thickening as Lactococcus cultures work for 12 to 24 hours. The result is cultured butter, measurably higher in conjugated linoleic acid than any commercial product. The raw milk it began as is the only item on this list that is genuinely, unambiguously banned. The sale of raw milk is illegal or heavily restricted in most American states, yet Amish farms continue producing it legally for on-farm consumption. Hand churning preserves enzymes that pasteurization destroys, and the cream's 84% butterfat content puts industrial butter to shame. On the kitchen counter, a glass jar of bubbling sourdough starter has been alive for over 100 years, fed daily by 3 generations of the same family. The wild yeasts and Lactobacillus sanfrancisensis it captures from the air perform a long, slow fermentation that breaks down phytic acid, dramatically improves mineral absorption, and partially predigests the gluten in the wheat. Many people who cannot tolerate industrial bread eat traditional sourdough without symptoms. No factory bread produced in 90 minutes from commercial yeast packets can replicate this microbial ecosystem. In the smokehouse, hickory and applewood smoke drifts around hanging hams. 3 antimicrobial mechanisms operate simultaneously, a fact that food scientists only recently characterized in detail. Heat begins the kill. The phenolic compounds guaiacol and syringol inhibit bacterial growth at the meat surface. Gradual dehydration drops water activity below 0.85, the exact threshold below which most pathogens cannot reproduce. Modern liquid smoke flavorings, painted onto factory hams, contain none of these antimicrobial benefits, only the flavor molecules. Beside the smoked hams hang salt-cured ones, dry-rubbed with coarse salt that pulls water from the meat through pure osmosis. Engineers describe this as thermodynamic dehydration, the same principle that drives reverse osmosis desalination membranes, only running in the opposite direction. A properly salt-cured ham stored in an Amish basement can last 2 years without refrigeration. USDA processed meat regulations make traditional curing nearly impossible to sell commercially, regardless of how safe it is. On the basement shelves, glass jars of pickled beets, cucumbers, and eggs sit in rows. The vinegar brine has dropped the pH below 4.6. That is the exact regulatory threshold the FDA still uses today, because Clostridium botulinum cannot grow or produce its toxin below that number. The Amish do not need to consult the FDA guideline. They learned the pH safety threshold through 200 years of doing it correctly, and they preserve their foods without a single chemical preservative. Above the pickled jars sits a row of pressure-canned meats and vegetables, processed at 240 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the only home temperature that reliably destroys botulism spores in low-acid foods. Boiling water canning of meats, which many American homes did in mason jars throughout the 20th century, is now considered genuinely unsafe by every modern food safety guideline. Amish kitchens have always used both methods, with strict knowledge of which foods require which. The all-American pressure canner used in those kitchens has a design dating back to 1930. In a corner of the cellar, a wooden barrel of apple cider vinegar bubbles slowly. A cellulose biofilm called the mother floats on top, hosting live bacterial cultures. The 2-stage fermentation, with yeast converting sugar to alcohol and then acetobacter converting alcohol to acetic acid, produces a vinegar with documented post-meal glucose-lowering effects, published in Medscape General Medicine in 2006. Commercial filtered vinegar removes the biologically active mother entirely. Amish families keep their continuous vinegar barrels alive for decades. On the stove, a stock pot has been simmering bones for a full 24 hours, extracting collagen, gelatin, glycine, proline, and bioavailable calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. Bone broth is now sold in trendy health stores as a $500 million functional food category, packaged in elegant cartons at premium prices. Amish cooks have used it as a kitchen staple for generations, made from bones that would otherwise be discarded. Outside in the garden, Eggshells from breakfast are being crushed and worked into the soil around the brassicas. Eggshells are 95% calcium carbonate, chemically identical to agricultural lime, and recent agronomic trials have shown that finely ground shells outperform commercial lime per pound. Industrial agriculture pays for what Amish farmers harvest free from their chicken coops. Beside the brassicas, corn, beans, and squash grow together in the same mound. The bean roots host rhizobia bacteria that fix atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. The corn stalks support the climbing beans, and the squash leaves shade out weeds below. This is the same nitrogen chemistry as the industrial Haber-Bosch process, but biological, free, and ancient. Indigenous Americans developed it. Amish farmers preserved it. Further down the property, a stone building sits over a cold, flowing spring. The springhouse is the original refrigerator. The constant 50-degree spring water cools milk, butter, and cheese through pure convective heat transfer, and some springhouses in Lancaster County have operated continuously since the 1700s. They require zero electricity, contain zero moving parts, and last for 3 centuries. Inside, milk cans sit submerged in the cold flowing water, and the temperature of fresh milk drops from 100 degrees to under 40 degrees in less than an hour. Modern dairy processing plants use plate heat exchangers based on this exact principle. In the smokehouse, alongside the hams, hang ropes of cold-smoked, air-dried sausage. This is the masterwork of preservation, the combined application of salt cure, nitrate from saltpeter, slow cold smoke, controlled lactobacillus fermentation, and humidity-controlled dehydration. The nitrite specifically blocks botulism toxin formation in the dense interior of the sausage. The fermentation drops the pH below the safety threshold. The drying finishes the work, producing a shelf-stable sausage that hangs at room temperature for months. Modern food safety law has made this kind of home sausage production legally precarious almost everywhere it is still attempted. And underneath all 18 of these techniques sits the 19th, the real engineer's principle, the one that food scientist Lothar Leisner formally named in 1976. He called it hurdle technology, the stacking of multiple independent preservation barriers so that no single failure leads to spoilage. Cabbage gets salted to lower water activity, then fermented to drop pH, then root cellared to lower temperature. 3 independent hurdles, any one of which would slow spoilage on its own, and combined, they preserve food for an entire winter. Amish cooks were doing this for 250 years before Leisner gave it a Greek letter equation and a German technical name. Why did all of this disappear from American kitchens? USDA pasteurization mandates issued in the 1940s criminalized raw milk distribution. Mason jar manufacturers profited handsomely from selling boiling water canning equipment, which proved unsafe for meats. The refrigeration industry spent decades framing root cellars as primitive and unsanitary, while selling electric appliances. Home economics textbooks after 1950 removed fermentation entirely from American education, and industrial food processing required regulatory frameworks that made traditional methods illegal to sell, even when they were demonstrably safer than the alternatives. The modern vindication is happening quietly. Stanford gut microbiome research confirms what fermented food eaters always knew. The Cell Journal in 2021 documented reductions in inflammatory markers from fermented foods. The BBC ranked traditional animal fats above industrial seed oils. Food and Function in 2018 showed sauerkraut helping irritable bowel patients. European nutrition research keeps vindicating bone broth, cultured dairy, and slow fermentation. None of these techniques were ever secret. None of them required hidden knowledge. They were abandoned in the name of convenience and industrial profit, sold away one generation at a time. The Amish never stopped using them because they never bought the marketing that told them to stop. Modern food engineers are now publishing papers describing exactly what Amish grandmothers always knew. The real ban, in the end, was not on the food. It was on the knowledge itself, on what industrial food culture quietly stopped teaching American families. And it is being unbanned, slowly, one rediscovered crock at a time.